when I was in the second grade, the teacher I had, her name was Mr. Rico, we had to do a book report. So it was on social studies. So she said, I want you to go to the library. Everybody go to the library, nice size library in a grammar school I went to, and pick out a book and write a book report about it.
Sure.
So I went in there, already armed with the knowledge where I wanted to find something about history because I love these Story of America cards. And I just happened to pull out David Chandler's Campaigns of Napoleon. It's about a 1,200-page book.
Oh my God.
And I remember seeing the book and reading it and learning about this guy Napoleon in the preface. I'm like, wow, he seems pretty cool. This guy won a lot of battles. So I brought it to my teacher and she thought it was a joke. She said, you went to the teacher section, the faculty section. I'm like, I really want it. So she goes, okay. So I make a long story short. I wrote a book report on the book after I read it. And I've read it about 4 or 5 times since. But that's my first experience with history in school.
That's so different. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. That's such a neat
No
story.
problem.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Now, today we have a guest. We haven't had anybody in a little while. So today we are joined by Eddie, the host of History Unlimited account on Instagram and other places. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you, Scott and Jen. I really appreciate the invite tonight and look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, before we get into chatting with Eddie, I want to ask any of our listeners or our watchers on YouTube, before we get into the main topic, I want to ask for some reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We are trying to grow the podcast, and these reviews really do help us get discovered. And remember, we still have our goal of defeating the History Channel as the top destination for all things history. I'm coming for you, History Channel.
Doesn't everybody?
I'm coming for you.
Bring history back.
So today we are joined by Eddie, who many of you may know as the brains behind the very popular Instagram account History Unlimited. Eddie also runs an account on Facebook and TikTok and is a military historian and firefighter with degrees in both history and fire science. A fellow Navy veteran, Eddie is also a current Navy parent. Thank you for joining us tonight, Eddie. And Eddie, right now as of recording, you've got about 140,000 followers on Instagram, but it sounds like you may have tried a few things before you got there. So can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the various accounts that you've done, you've tried out? Maybe there's some that are sitting in the graveyard that you just haven't touched in a while, which we all are familiar with. But can you tell us a little bit about that, a little bit about yourself and how you came to some of the accounts you're running now?
Okay, yeah. I'm just about to hit 150,000.
Oh, right
So,
on.
I'm looking forward to that, and I have about maybe a couple hundred more. And I love every one of my followers and appreciate every one of them. I started on a site called WordPress. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
That's where I run our site.
And I started writing, this day in history articles and taking content from papers I did while in college and putting them all together in a format where I can deliver different insights on historical topics that, are popular and some unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I started there and I gradually worked my way up to Facebook. And I started the History Writer was my original account on Facebook. And I did the same thing there. I just a larger audience, a larger format.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I started to get involved in TikTok. It was very funny how I got involved in TikTok. My daughter, who turns 18 in 2 days,
Oh, wow. Happy birthday.
she had a Musical.ly account. And Musical.ly was the precursor to TikTok, obviously, owned by the same company, ByteDance. So I wanted to try it out and say, you know what? She wasn't using the account anymore. She made a new one. So let me take this account and, go on and take a look at the videos. I heard TikTok is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to go on around the anniversary of September 11th in 2019. So I went on a video that showed the South Tower collapsing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just happened to mention on there that I am a firefighter and was a first responder to the World Trade Center.
Yes, because
and after 9/11.
You searched
Yes.
for survivors after.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I did. I did it for 4 days and 5 nights, I think it was. Yeah, 5 nights. So I was there in rescue recovery in the days after 9/11, and I made a comment on one of the videos, and the comment immediately, like comments on all videos that are viral, went viral itself. And all of a sudden I started getting followers on this page. And I had people coming on my page saying, that's not you, that's your daughter. She looks like 12. I'm like, that's my daughter.
Yeah.
And so I started to I had to start making content of my own.
Sure.
Being a new creator, I really didn't know how to do it very well. But I started making, content very slowly, some little videos here and there. My first video, I believe, was about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914.
Yep.
And it was a short video, and I took off from there. And then I started making more and got a little better. The history writer got to around 50,000 followers. And unfortunately, that's when TikTok started to impose its stricter guidelines into historical content. And being a military historian, they started to crack down on combat footage and anything to talk. You couldn't talk about World War II. You couldn't talk about the Third Reich. You couldn't talk about any history of the period without being heavily scrutinized.
Yeah.
So my account there got shadow banned. We're sure you know what shadow ban is.
Yep.
I started another page, and that was the page that History Unlimited. And that account got to around 130,000 followers until guess what? That page too was taken down, and I lost that account entirely. It was banned. I had a Vietnam War page that I specifically ran on TikTok dedicated to the Vietnam War era itself. That got to around 70,000 followers. And guess what they did with that page? They banned that one as well.
That's wild.
So I just turned around one day and said, you know what? What's a really good TikTok alternative? Because this TikTok thing isn't working out very well.
Sure.
And I wasn't really into YouTube very much, so I love YouTube. Don't get me wrong. But as a creator, it wasn't really for me. So I decided to, expand upon the History Unlimited page that I had begun a couple of years ago, but never posted anything on it. And I started creating videos. And soon I realized the more videos I created, I was taking a risk on posting, combat footage. And I posted a video about the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler with Stauffenberg. And it actually did very well. But what I was surprised about was that Instagram allowed the content to stay up. And after that, I realized, you know what? Instagram isn't as strict as TikTok is. Maybe I could do some more. And it just snowballed. I just started creating more content. I share a lot of combat footage. If you've seen my page, you'll know that.
You share a lot of combat footage.
But, what makes my page a little different than my colleagues, and I have a lot of people who I collab with. I try to help their account and vice versa. I know you're familiar with that.
Yeah, we just couldn't figure out how to do it.
I did.
forgot how to do it.
I tried.
But thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. It's actually how I'm growing my Vietnam War account. I have almost 10,000 followers on that account. So I'm trying to, collab with that one where Vietnam War content. So I have a collaborator for each period in history. Because what makes my account unique is that I cover all periods of history. I don't focus on one specific area.
Yeah, that's us too.
You might have somebody. Yeah, exactly. You said that's why, we're very similar in our content production, like you had mentioned. And you're absolutely correct. And I try to focus on what my followers enjoy to see the most. And that really centers on the Second World War, Vietnam, the First World War, to a degree, the Korean War. Civil War is really popular also, but when you start going back further in history and you want to start covering subjects that you like in particular the most, it's not as popular. Because when you go back past the 19th century, all the way down to the Napoleonic Wars, right then and there in the Napoleonic era and the Asian revolutions is where the majority of people's interests stop. And there's a huge gap there. It's ancient history to the pre-modern era. And in between is hard to post because there's not a large audience out there for that. And you got to please your followers, otherwise you'll lose them. So you don't want to do that, and you want to satisfy your viewership. And I do that to satisfy my viewership. Lately, I've been posting more about the war in Ukraine. And there's a lot of accounts out there that specifically cover the war in Ukraine. So what I'll do is I'll take some content that I see that's shared either off YouTube or other platforms, and I'll convert them into a 9:16 video format.
Yep.
And share it on Instagram, and it does really well in Reel. If it's a long video, I put it as a post or a story, and they get a really good response for it. And the one thing I've been running into problems with is that, of course, when you post about the Ukraine war, you're either one side or the other in the community. Okay, you try to be fair, and I'm very unbiased when it comes to that. Yes, I'm obviously a Ukraine supporter. Okay. But there's two sides to every story, and I have followers from both sides. So I try to post as much content from both as I can. But people don't seem to understand that there's more content from the Ukrainian side than there is from the Russian side because of the censorship in Russia.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's very little coming out of there. So I've had to deal with that lately. Oh, you're biased because you're posting about the Russians. And then I post about the Ukrainians, and they're saying the same thing to me. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to post the truth.
Eddie,
I'm posting history.
I've been accused of being right wing and left wing for the same video. So
sure.
I was like, okay.
Yeah. It happens all the time. And you'll notice from engaging in your engagement on posts is very important for the followers to know who you are personally.
Yeah.
And I try to do that as much as possible. I try to answer as many comments as I can. When you have a bunch of DMs coming in, and when you have tens of thousands of people trying to contact you, you can't always get to everyone, and you feel bad about it.
Sure.
The one thing I notice with creators that are larger than mine, accounts that are larger than mine, they'll follow a lot of people, and sometimes they don't engage with anybody. So I try to not make that same mistake, to try to get a better reputation, not try to emulate what they do in making that mistake. And the way I become a creator was take all of the methods that I learned from other creators on every platform, or put them together into this account, and I deliver it in different formats. Sometimes I'll post just a regular war video, combat footage. Other times I'll post a this day in history where I talk. And there's other times where I might show up on the screen. You never know what I'm going to do. And, I'm less likely to show up on screen nowadays, because my philosophy is that people are going on to watch a video. They'd rather watch pictures or videos than my face. And I'm just being honest about it. Sure. So I try to show, give everybody a good, decent, viewership into what the content is about.
Sure.
But that's how I started out in a nutshell, and it's been going good.
So it's always fun to get a good little snapshot of our guests. But one of the things that I like to do on the podcast that's fun is a lot of times we do a word association game. It's what I call a history word association game. Now for yours, I was trying to figure out something to do, so I'm doing something a little bit different. And this is more of a history fill in the blank. So the first one is going to be the blank locker. What would you fill in for that?
Oh, the Hurt Locker.
There you go. Okay, so the Hurt Locker. So now the next one will be all blank on the blank front.
All quiet on the Western Front.
All right, I think you're probably sensing the theme here. This one is the blank line.
The thin red line.
All right. Next one is blank now.
Oh, I love this one. Apocalypse Now.
There we go. Yeah, we'll get to chat about some of these. I got two more here. All right, this one's a little trickier. The blank on the blank.
Yeah, this
blank.
one is trickier.
Yeah, this one's a little harder. This is where Jen got hung
I
up.
will admit I did not get this one.
Yeah.
Wow, this one's tough.
This one's a little bit harder. Usually, because people don't usually say the at the beginning.
Yeah,
of this.
and I was bummed because I love this movie.
This one is going to get me. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, so I'll
on this one.
I'll give you the hints on this one. And again, Jen didn't get this one either. This one's the bridge on the River Kwai.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
I know. I did the same thing.
And people don't usually say like the at the beginning. And the last one is blank Ryan, which is, I think, probably the one of the more obvious.
Saving Private.
Saving Private Ryan. So I did all those just to do something fun, something a little bit different. But what I wanted to use that was, it's like, those are some of I was looking around at kind of lists of what people consider some of the top military history movies of all time. And a lot of those ones are kind of ones that I saw on different websites. So what are some of your kind of favorite, you mentioned Apocalypse Now. What are some of your kind of favorite military history movies that you can just watch over and over?
First and foremost, Glory.
Oh yeah. That's a
The
popular
movie
one for our
Glory. And the
guests.
reason for it is it's an outstanding movie. And I was in the movie as an extra.
Oh,
Okay.
cool.
I've been an American Civil War reenactor for 35 years,
Okay.
give or take. So I've been able to play as an extra in Glory, in Gettysburg, in Gods and Generals. I wouldn't recommend Gods and Generals. Gettysburg is a great movie also.
Yes, it is.
It's a marathon movie.
So,
it
Eddie,
really
do you
is.
have the Union uniform or the Confederate uniform? What uniform have you put
Yes,
together?
I portray a Union officer. I'm
Okay.
a Union
Okay.
lieutenant, first lieutenant.
That's expensive.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It cost from when I first started at 16 years until a few years ago when I stopped buying pieces to my kit, I would probably say between myself and my parents, we've spent at least $30,000 over the years.
Wow.
Yeah. In just the uniform and accoutrements and the weapons and everything else.
Sure.
You put a lot of money into it because you want to look as authentic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, your portrayal of your character is determined by how you look.
Mm-hmm.
You look the part, you're going to play the part better. The Glory is definitely on my top of my
Very
list.
cool.
The Cross of Iron is another movie which I absolutely love.
Okay.
And The Duelists, about the Napoleonic Wars, the two duelists.
Oh, cool.
Okay. Patton, of course,
Mhm.
on everybody's list, I would
That's a great
imagine.
one. Yeah, that was one of the other ones I
I
saw
love
in like
Dorsey
top
Scott.
15, top 20 on some of
Mhm.
those pages. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And let's see. God, there's so many of them. I've mentioned perhaps, so many I've seen, but there's Hunt for Red October, there's
Yeah.
Crimson Tide. They're
Okay.
military type movies. They're not
Uh-huh.
really history, but
Yeah.
the Hunt for Red October is based on a true story
Mhm.
from what took place in the 1970s.
Yep.
Yep.
So really, it is a history story, like that's exaggerated a bit. Those are the movies that I enjoy. Of course, I've seen basically everything at least once. I
Sure.
mean, you
Sure,
name it,
sure.
I've probably seen it.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say yours are, Jen? Like some of your top favorites?
I always think everyone needs to watch the first 10 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. I think it needs to be shown in every high school.
Yeah.
I mean, the story is, it definitely gets, and I appreciate that story too for the highs and lows and the humanity of the people choices that they're making
Yeah.
during that. And I liked, but it is a story, but the beginning is so well shot. I think that everyone
is.
needs to see that.
When they first screened that movie, veterans of D-Day were actually crying in the movie
Yeah.
theater because
Yeah,
it was so
sure.
realistic
Yeah.
in their experience.
Yeah.
And, it's unbelievable. And that movie was very popular for a long time when it
Mhm.
first came out. And it inspired Band of Brothers to be produced.
Yes.
And and also the Pacific, which is the Band of Brothers counterpart for the,
Yes. Yep.
Pacific Theater.
Absolutely.
So all those, they're very well produced series, and they all are very similar to Saving Private Ryan, the way they're produced.
Mm-hmm.
The cinematography and the special effects, they're all the same, and they have the same feel, like you're actually on a battlefield right there.
Yes.
It's very intense, and I love movies like that.
Yeah,
They're awesome.
And I will say that new 1917 really pulled me in.
That
Oh,
one.
yeah.
That
I
one
thought
was
that
really
was
good.
well done, and I got pulled into that story, the realism of all of that.
Mhm.
I enjoyed
Yes.
that one as well too.
Yeah, I think that one for me, Eddie, I joke on this podcast all the time that I am often at a severe disadvantage on this podcast because I am not the history nerd whenever I am interviewing someone who's a huge history buff like yourself, degrees in it, and then my wife, the historian. And so it actually brings a different perspective from my side because I haven't seen a lot of these
Mhm.
movies. I've
Right.
seen some of them, but some of the ones I actually was happy to see Hurt Locker a little bit higher because it's a newer
Yeah.
movie, 2008 timeframe, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah,
But
around then.
it was right around then, but I appreciated that one. There was another one I actually did see at the time. I saw Jarheads. Did you ever see
I never
Jarheads?
see Jarhead.
So,
Yes.
so Jarheads was
Oh,
actually
yeah.
was actually really good. It
Yeah.
was Jake Gyllenhaal.
Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah.
But he shows what he was a sniper,
Mhm.
and the whole movie is about
Yes.
this one chance he had to actually like,
He has,
shoot
and-
someone, and then
Yeah.
it basically doesn't happen, and he deals with that he wanted to do the one thing that he was trained to do, and all the stuff like post war, and
Mhm.
so I a lot of the movies that I actually have seen, which tend to be the much more popular ones, or like the Saving Private Ryans and things like that. do a great
Right.
job of showing the kind of the aftermath, whether, back in the day they called it shell shock, and now we know it's PTSD. And I mean, we started watching, we tried out that show on Netflix called Peaky Blinders. In Peaky Blinders, so and one of the characters in there, it's just after World War One, and one of the characters in there has what we would know now of like severe PTSD. Is what I think he's what ends up being one of the Peaky Blinders. But
somebody
very
just said Black Hawk Down. I actually love Black Hawk Down too, Jake. I'm a Black Hawk pilot. So when there's things that I watch it and I'm like, it hits me hard. I usually have to be working out when I watch it, but I do Black Hawk.
Yeah. So those are the ones that I tend to appreciate, and really all the good movies, I think, and you would probably agree with this, show what war does to the soldier, to the sailor, to the members during and after. It's just so intense.
Yeah. But I enjoy that they're hitting the bigger audiences, and they're hitting, because some movies did do that, but I don't know, I enjoy that they're starting to zero in on more women or different types of people on different sides, and they're trying to show more of the humanity of war and that really the both sides of it. But I can also watch like a movie that's pretty Hollywood. I can watch The Patriot over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Patriot. I could talk about an hour and a half for that one.
And that's
just
okay.
Man,
there's some
just
that are
from
over the top.
That's really over the top. It's a gross exaggeration of history, and from a reenacting standpoint, it was a train wreck.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah.
One of the movies I wanted to mention that is one of my personal favorites, Waterloo, from 1970. I'm a big Napoleon fan. Napoleon is my personal idol. Yes, I love Napoleon, Napoleonic Wars, the Napoleonic era, and I'm really looking forward to the new Napoleon movie coming out. So Joaquin Phoenix playing as Napoleon.
Oh my God!
It'll give people. Yeah, it's a big production, and they're coming out with a series on top of the film.
He'll be great.
And I think it's important because Napoleon is such an important figure in history that is really, more books have been written about Napoleon than any other person in history, with the exception of Jesus Christ in the Bible.
Wow.
And I'm not really a religious person, but I'll recognize that that's the most popular book ever written and published. Napoleon comes a second. That's pretty remarkable. And that's all really due to the British propaganda engine after the Napoleonic Wars, where they tried to make him look smaller, literally, than he really was. Because he was larger than life at the time. He really, and he tried to minimize his accomplishments because of the disdain they had for him. But this should be a good movie, and it should give, young people a good understanding of a subject that really isn't very touched upon in mainstream education right now.
Yeah.
You really don't talk about that.
That's
and
true.
It had a serious impact on the current war we live in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, real quick, not to get into a Napoleonic subject, but one of my thesis in college was to, the origins of World War One. And a lot of people like to point to the Franco-Prussian War and the arms race and acronym, Maine,
Sure.
I pointed to the Congress of Vienna in 1814, which redrew the map of Europe and established the alliance systems that 100 years later would enact it. So that would propel Europe into war, spiraling out of control.
Sure.
So there is a connection between the two, and I think it's really understudied, and it's very interesting.
That's very interesting. I would like to read your Napoleon has a huge impact on America, especially when you think
Absolutely.
On America, but the French and with Haiti and then with, the Louisiana Purchase, it's just a huge impact on our history as well. So I can definitely see that. I'm looking forward to seeing that movie too. Do you know, it's going to be like his whole life or just one part of it, just Waterloo or?
No, I think it's going to be just when he became first consul of France.
Okay.
In 1800 and then all the way until 1815. But I could be wrong. The series itself, I believe, is supposed to predate 1800. So it's probably going to start his tour out in 1792, and then work its way up to the French Revolutionary Wars.
Sure.
And then it'll probably stop at where the movie takes over. So they're doing it in reverse, but
Sure.
it should be interesting to see how they present it.
Yeah.
But since you mentioned Napoleon and American history, the two are very much intertwined.
Mhm.
And the United States was Napoleon's only international ally during the coalition wars. And one of the least known facts about the War of 1812, okay, is that the War of 1812 and Napoleon's campaign of 1812 in Russia
Mhm.
were linked because President Madison
Mhm.
and also Napoleon had a secret cabal where they communicated to the timetable of the declaration of war against Great Britain and a declaration of war against Russia. And it all happened in June. And they were very close to getting it within the day, which is remarkable for the
Wow.
communications for the time period.
Absolutely.
But they only discovered this they only discovered this in the early 20th century.
Wow.
And they were secret letters that were sent between the two. And it's really not in history books. And they're only starting to come out right now when there's a book written about the War of 1812. They'll mention it like in a chapter or whatever.
Sure.
But it's very misunderstood,
That's a forgotten war. We cover the War of 1812 a lot
Oh, yeah.
because we lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, and Oliver Hazard Perry and the war, the Battle of Lake Erie was such a huge part of where we lived. So you have to know about the War of 1812.
Sure.
But that's a forgotten war. People don't know much about that war and the battles around that war. People will, when you talk about the burning of D.C., they'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Or if you talk about, the Star Spangled Banner, they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember. But really talking about the war and the battles and the naval history and stuff, that's one that does need more attention.
Yeah, that whole time period.
Mm-hmm.
The establishment of the young republic with George Washington as the first president. No time in our history has our nation been in such peril than his two terms.
Mm-hmm.
The French Revolution, that was a major event in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And it could have drawn the United States into conflict with either side
Sure.
and crippled the republic. It's amazing what he was able to accomplish. But yeah, I mean, there's, you said you lived in Pennsylvania and I live in New Jersey.
Okay.
So we're right across, they call New Jersey the crossroads of the American Revolution for
Sure.
a reason.
Yeah.
Now it's all around you.
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Absolutely.
When you're living among history, you tend to enjoy it a whole lot more.
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think this is a good segue into one of the next questions that I like to ask our guests. I often tend to ask, what's the first historical event that you remember? But since we're talking about Napoleon, something that we may or may not learn in school, I'll kind of broaden that into, what's one of the first things you may remember learning about history in school or, a historical event. So what's something like that from earlier in your childhood that just sticks out in your mind, from your youth when it comes to history?
The very first thing I remember when I was able to watch TV at the age of 5 years old was the end of the Vietnam War in 1975.
Wow.
I remember the videos of the helicopters on the roof of the U.S. Embassy and the people evacuating. I was able to, have those memories. But my first experience actually is pretty funny. There's two experiences I had. First is my parents bought me what was called the Story of America cards for the bicentennial celebration in 1976.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're very familiar with these. You probably could find them on eBay if you take a look. But they're history cards. And we didn't have the internet back then, obviously.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in order to get your history, you had to read.
Yep.
You actually had to go to the library.
Yeah.
But this
Imagine
was
that.
cool. Yeah, it was like an abbreviated encyclopedia in card format. And I started reading and I'm like, I don't know what I'm reading, but it sounds pretty cool. The American Revolution, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton. What's this Civil War thing? I was like, wow, I had to ask my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in the second grade, the teacher I had, her name was Mr. Rico, we had to do a book report. And it was on social studies. So she said, I want you to go to the library. Everybody go to the library, nice sized library in a grammar school I went to, and pick out a book and write a book report about it.
Sure.
So I went in there, already armed with the knowledge where I wanted to find something about history because I love these Story of America cards. And I just happened to pull out David Chandler's Campaigns of Napoleon. It's about a 1,200-page book.
Oh my God.
And I remember seeing the book and reading it and learning about this guy Napoleon in the preface. I'm like, wow, he seems pretty cool. This guy won a lot of battles. So I brought it to my teacher and she thought it was a joke. You went to the teacher section, the faculty section. I really want it. So she goes, okay. So I make a long story short. I wrote a book report on the book after I read it, and I've read it about 4 or 5 times since. But that's my first experience with history in school.
That's so different. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. That's such a neat
No
story that I kind of,
and you love Napoleon even today, which is very cool.
Yeah,
know?
and for me, just to be silly about it, hits me right in the feels because it's you're getting a book from the library, which for us, I think for our generation, right? Me being the younger one on this conversation here, but being born in 1982 myself, right? So I'll turn 41 this coming year.
That's okay.
But again, for me, that I spent a ton of time in my youth. Because where I grew up in Central California, I didn't get free television. My parents didn't pay for cable or anything like that. So I just read a ton. And so I appreciate that. And it's so interesting that, hey, instead of reading, the Hardy Boys like I did when I was a kid, you were reading about Napoleon. I just think that's so neat. And I think that's really cool. That's such a cool way to be that's the thing. That's where I planted my flag. And that's where my love of history started. That's really, really cool. I appreciate that.
Eddie,
thank you.
Who do you think has portrayed Napoleon the best then in a movie so far?
It's a toss-up between two. And Rod Steiger in Waterloo in 1970, he portrayed an excellent Napoleon. And also Ramon de Sante.
That's the one I was thinking of. Napoleon and Josephine. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I watched that whole miniseries. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really is awesome. And his demeanor is very much how like Napoleon was, and he even looked like him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Rod Steiger, during the Battle of Waterloo anyway, when it took place in 1815, Rod Steiger looks more like Napoleon in 1815.
Okay.
So the two of them complement each other very well because Napoleon and Josephine, most of the story took place when they were younger.
Sure.
With Waterloo, it's when Napoleon was already in his late 40s. Those are two great actors. And I think Joaquin Phoenix is going to be like a great Napoleon because he looks like him.
He's an amazing actor.
He can embody anybody.
He really is.
He's so versatile.
And I think he's going to be an excellent Napoleon.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to it. Really, am. It's supposed to come out, I think, next year.
Okay.
But when you have Steven Spielberg working on it and a whole bunch of other great producers,
that's going to be.
You've got a great storyline here. You have perhaps the most popular historical figure ever, and you're going to make best producers are going to make a movie about.
Yeah,
that's a win.
I'm just pleased as punch at your story, and I'm gonna have to clip that and share that. I just absolutely love that. So moving on from that, you mentioned you're from New Jersey, right? Not too far from where we lived in Erie, which is a little bit further away on the other side of the state.
Yeah, we have family in Jersey, though.
We've got family in Jersey, so we're familiar with the New Jersey area.
So if we were coming to visit you and we're like, we're going to do a walk with history, Eddie, and we want to stay local, where would you take us? What's your local history there that everyone knows about?
Some the locals know that everybody else may or may not.
I would take you to Fort Lee, which is the actual fort itself. It's not just a town, it's an actual fort.
Oh, right on.
Fort Lee, I take you to the Palisades, where the British had ascended the Palisades. Lord Cornwallis brought his army up the 300-foot Palisades. I would bring you to Hackensack, which is right next door to me. I live right next door to Hackensack. You got a lot of old cemeteries there.
Yeah.
Cool. I live in Bergen County is chock full of colonial history and American Revolutionary War history. So we have several battlefields. We actually have one in my town here of Hasbrook Heights. It's a small one. We also have a lot of battlefields in southern New Jersey. We have Monmouth Battlefield.
Oh, yeah. My cousin
and of course, we have New York City. We have New York City. And a lot of people don't realize New York City, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and part of Queens, Long Island, they're actually standing on the largest battlefield of the American Revolutionary War.
Yes.
And there really isn't much in the way of statues and plaques to commemorate that event, but it was the largest battle by numbers. And it's really forgotten here because of the industry and the commercialization and everything.
Sure.
Whereas Boston does a great job of preserving their history.
Yeah.
New York City really doesn't.
I took my cousins to Francine's Tavern, the one where George Washington had his
Tavern,
the one right by the church by Ground Zero. you would know.
Yes.
And
yeah.
that
Yep.
still exists.
Okay.
You didn't go.
Yes. Went to dinner there.
Yep.
Was going to go to dinner there a few weeks ago.
Mhm.
We had dinner reservations, but something personal came up. We couldn't go.
Yeah.
But it's a very nice place to go. It's very affordable. It's a very nice atmosphere. And once you step inside, you're like, wow, General Washington was right here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He was right here. His officers were right here. That's really cool,
Mhm.
So you get all giddy about it like we do.
I do. I do. I totally do. That's me. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, and I just kind of I follow along and wrangle our kids, and it's fun too, and that's one of the things we've enjoyed. Like we're in Norfolk, Virginia, and one of the fun things about living where we are now, and probably about where you are, is as fans of history and living right smack in the middle of where all this history happened.
Yep.
You're just like a kid in a candy store. We've got a friend of ours. I think you just talked to her the other day, that Lisa from Historical USA. She's in Washington, D.C. now, and she says she's just out all the time, just walking around D.C. And how could you not, live in places like that and be like, okay, I've got plenty of stuff to do on my to-do list. My list is full for the weekend for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Down in Virginia, and you'll notice down in Virginia, you got the American Civil War. You got the American Revolution. You have everything right there.
Yeah, we have colonial. We have what do they call it? The historic triangle. So we have Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, right? So the historic triangle is here.
Yeah. They're all great places to visit. I've been there at least once.
It's so great. We have year-long passes to Williamsburg.
Yeah.
Like
we're down there all the time.
I'm like a kid in a candy store when we go there. It's really a good time.
I got a cool Williamsburg story if you got a few seconds here.
Absolutely.
So I went to Williamsburg. The first time I went to Williamsburg when I was it was like, I think 1982.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, the same year you were born. And that was my first time. And when I went back the second time in 1990, when I was a teenager, I remember walking through the Williamsburg Cemetery. Yeah. And you're talking about older graves, okay? There was this one above ground crypt. The woman had died, I believe, in the 1760s, and she had died while giving birth, which was very common in the 18th century, as you know. And inside the crypt itself, on the inscription, it said, I forgot the lady's name, unfortunately, but it said mother and baby. So the two of them were actually in there, and there was a crack in the crypt itself, the above ground crypt, and you could actually see inside.
Wow.
Now you couldn't see a box because over the course of time wood decays, but you did see something in there. And I was pretty spooked out by it, but also thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, because I love going to cemeteries at night. I'm all for that. I'm into the ghost hunting and everything like that. And I love looking at the gravestones. I drive my fiance crazy because we go to all different grave sites.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she plays Pokemon Go and I play gravesite.
Perfect.
That works
but
out.
Yeah, that's one of my Williamsburg stories.
That's a cool one.
So you would love the Williamsburg Ghost Tour then. Have you ever done one?
On Halloween, I wanted to do a live on Clinton Road. I'm sure you've heard of Clinton Road before. I don't know. It's considered to be the most haunted road in America.
Oh, really?
And it's in West Milford, New Jersey, right down the street from where my fiance lives. And it's rumored to be haunted by Native American spirits, by soldiers of the American Revolution, escaped slaves from the Underground Railroad. So there's a lot of history there. And it's really spooky. You go through there. I'm not scared off by things like that very easily. But when you go down there and you drive through those windy roads at night, it's pretty cool. And for a live session, I really want to do it this year. I didn't get a chance to do it last year, but it should be pretty cool when I do.
That'd be neat.
That would be neat. My friend was going to come on this, but I don't see her on here. She has a great ghost story from Gettysburg, and they saw two. They thought they were reenactors coming the other way.
It was over by Devil's Den.
It was over by Devil's Den.
Yeah.
And they waved at him, and they didn't really wave back. They didn't wave back at all. They just looked at him, and they were all like dirty, and they were like, wow, they're going for it with the reenacting. Like they're
really into it.
They're really into it. And then that night they took a ghost tour, and they went by there, and the guy said one of the two biggest specters that people see the most are on this road, and it's these two. Right. And her and her dad looked at each other and were like, what?
Wow.
I know, right? I've done a ghost tour in Gettysburg. Those are cool too. I like the Gettysburg ones because I learned a ton of stuff.
They are. I've been to Gettysburg no kidding. At least 70 or 80 times.
Wow.
From reenactments.
Sure.
And, but my favorite Gettysburg ghost story, real quick, is the ghost story where I was actually the ghost. And we were down there for the filming of the movie Gettysburg. And, reenactors, we're funny people. We like to dress up in our uniforms, even though we're not reenacting. We go out to dinner and everything, we go to bars and all that. Well, I just happened to go out into the National Cemetery out there, and I was walking around, and there was this newlywed couple that was at the hotel we were staying at. And my parents are outside, and I come walking out of the cemetery. And I'm in my full Union uniform, my sword, my ostrich plumed hat, and everything like that. And all of a sudden, the married couple turns around and freaks out. And they ran to the manager and said that they saw a ghost coming out of the cemetery. So the manager comes back, and I had gone into the room thinking that I didn't know what was going on, right? So I come out with the uniform, and they look like they've literally seen a ghost. They're all pale. My parents are like, "Oh, that's just my son." Oh my God, we're going to leave.
Yeah, I feel like we could probably keep talking about Napoleon, military movies, or ghosts for the next hour and change. But what's the best place for people to find you? Is it still the Instagram account, or do you have other spots? What's the best place for folks to find you? It's
definitely Instagram. It's definitely Instagram. That's my principal social media platform, right? It's History Unlimited.
Yep.
And also the Vietnam War 3.0. Those are my two accounts on Instagram that I personally run. Yeah.
All right. Right on. Thank you so much for joining us. And for anybody listening or watching.
Thank you.
Anybody listening or watching, if you enjoyed this episode of Talk with History, then you'll probably enjoy some of our past episodes where we interview other well-known history hosts like Eddie tonight. We've interviewed hosts like JD of the History Underground, Matt of the Mr. Beat History Channel, or Chris from WitDoc's YouTube Cemetery Tours. They all have some great stories to tell, as we talked about tonight. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast, and please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.